Now on the news at 10, hundreds of little lights lifted in honor of the 4 bright lights who lost their lives too soon.
Xana Kernodle.
Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves. The University of Idaho community remembers these young victims of murder and wraps their arms around their families. And the love and support stretched from Moscow all around the state. Schools far and wide shined large lights in solidarity.
They're going to see this and they're going to know that they're not alone. It is everybody in the state that cares and loves them.
All Idahoans vandals for a night. We have team coverage from Moscow to Boise as the state mourns amid a murder investigation. Good evening and thanks for joining us for the news at 10. I'm Doug Petcash. Tonight, the state of Idaho mourns the loss of those 4 University of Idaho students. From Coeur d'Alene to Caldwell, from Twin Falls to Idaho Falls, and of course in Moscow, Idahoans gathered at vigils to honor and remember the lives of Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Xana Kernodle. Investigators say the 4 were all likely asleep when they were stabbed to death in a home near the U of I campus 18 days ago. The search for their killer goes on. And we have team coverage tonight. Our News at 10 anchors Morgan Romero and Brian Holmes are standing by in Moscow, where the university held a vigil attended by hundreds. And Abby Davis is live in Boise to show how local school districts around the Treasure Valley and other areas honored the victims. We'll get to them in just a minute. But first, a quick check on the weather. Expected heavy snowfall forced the Idaho Department of Transportation to close Highway 21 from Idaho City up to Loman, as it often does this time of year because of that really big snowfall that's coming.
Well, yeah, just to show you, we kind of have like a hose that's spraying moisture up here through the southwest. Let me show you here as we take a look at our latest satellite, and here it is right along this area. As we move in just a little bit closer, you can see that most of the rain showers starts out as snow off the mountains, turns to rain as it heads toward the valley, and at this time it's breaking up. The question would be, is it going to do that all night? Because it's even doing it in the mountains right now, starting to let up just a little bit. But if we go out here to the southwest of Oregon, you see there's still more surges of these areas of moisture that's going to come in. Eventually it'll moisten the air over Boise because it's kind of dry right now, and once it comes in it'll start developing some of the rain showers. So I'm going to kind of give you the entire picture of what's taking place. With these storms coming in from the southwest, what it's doing is this cold air that's in the upper Midwest, like 17 degrees right now in Bismarck, is staying to our east. So once these storms start to break up and it slows down, a ridge of high pressure and dry conditions come in, we might start seeing a little bit more of this cold Arctic air that starts moving through some of the valleys throughout Montana and then eventually move down into Idaho. I expect that getting into next week. So I'll provide you with more of the details with this forecast coming up.
Tonight, Idahoans stood vandal strong. Vigils were held on the University of Idaho campus and at schools all over the state to honor the 4 young college students who were killed on Sunday, November 13th. News at 10 anchors Brian Holmes and Morgan Romero were there, and they are live in Moscow tonight outside the Kibbe Dome where the vigil was held earlier. And Morgan and Brian, it looked like a big crowd showing support for sure.
Yeah, they stood vandal strong, but they also stood shoulder to shoulder, filling up half of the football field inside the Kibbe Dome. Thousands of people showing up from around the community here. And of course, it was an emotional night, of course.
Yeah.
We heard from the president of the school, Scott Green. We heard from the dean of students. And we also heard from 3 of the victims' parents. Of the 4 that were killed 18 days ago. It was supposed to be a candlelight vigil, but because it was held inside the Kibbe Dome, they weren't allowed to have candles. So everybody had kind of an app they could download on their phone, and they could hold up their phone and kind of simulate holding up candles during the moments of silence.
Right. And before we take you inside of that vigil, there is something that we want to address before we get to those powerful stories and the words shared by the parents. We brought you an interview earlier from the Latah County prosecutor. I sat down with him this morning, and he told me that law enforcement has consistently said that this attack on the 4 students was targeted. He told me that investigators believe this attack was targeted because it was targeted towards a specific person who lived in the home. Meanwhile, he told a separate news outlet yesterday that targeted may not be the best word and that maybe the attack was focused on the house as a whole. Okay, so telling me that it was focused on a resident, telling somebody else it was focused on the house. Well, now he's backtracking that and saying he actually misspoke. His name is Bill Thompson, the Latah County prosecutor. He misspoke and he apologized. He sent a letter tonight and he corrected himself. We want to show you what he said. He said, quote, "We want to let you know that there was a miscommunication between detectives and my office. To clarify, investigators do not believe the murders were random, but we cannot unequivocally say the residents or any occupants were specifically targeted. Moscow PD also told me conflicting information has been released over the past 24 hours. Of course, they're talking about what was told to one outlet and then what was told to us. They said they spoke with the prosecutor's office and called it a miscommunication. They said, quote, detectives do not currently know if the residents or any occupants were specifically targeted, but they continue to investigate.
And that's something they've said from the very beginning,
Right.
however, that this was a targeted attack. And they kind of stuck through that up until this point, apparently.
Exactly. And even though they don't have a suspect in custody, it's important to note, like I said, they're saying it's not necessarily random. They are still maintaining that it was targeted and isolated. There is still a threat clearly to the community because the suspect is still at large.
Okay, so that's the latest on the investigation. But tonight was, of course, about the tribute to the victims and their families inside the Kibbe Dome.
Yeah, very emotional. Like Brian said earlier, we heard from 3 of 4 of the victims' parents, and they shared stories, they shared memories, they shared what they really wanted the community to know and remember about them. But the way that the vigil ended was in a beautiful moment of silence for the victims. Take a listen.
Xana Kernodle. Ethan Chapin. Kaylee Gonçalves. Madison Mogan.
That was the end of the vigil tonight, but from the very beginning, we could tell this was going to be an emotional night. Ethan's mom, Stacy, was on hand. She was one of the first parents to speak, and the minute she stood up there, and the first thing she said was, I am Ethan's mom. And emotionally, you could see she started crying and breaking down. And from that point on, we knew that this was going to be very tugging at the heartstrings and really kind of, there was some moments of laughter, but there was also these heartfelt moments like, again, Ethan's mom saying, this is a time to remember that every moment with your kids is valuable and I took a couple of notes, spend that time with your kids. But Steve Gonçalves also mentioned that, you know, this is the one thing he wanted people to learn from this is to remind everyone what we lost in these last 18 days. And that the eighth wonder of the world is the relationship between a father and his daughter and sharing the stories of her and their relationship. Madison's dad got up there saying she was the first granddaughter, their only child. And he mentioned her boyfriend, Jake. Yeah. And he said, I was glad that Madison at least got a little taste of what love is like in this life.
And on top of the parents who you'll hear from in just a moment, we did see Marlene Trump there, the BSU president. We saw Governor Brad Little there, other elected officials as well. We saw sorority members, sorority sisters of the victims. We saw Sigma Chi brothers and other fraternity members at the University of Idaho. With the Greek life being so close, we saw the football team, students, alum, everybody hugging, really embracing each other. A lot of tears tonight. Again, the parents sharing stories of what they want everybody to know about their kids.
I want everyone to know that these girls were absolutely beautiful. They had been friends since 6th grade. We both put them in a charter academy. They felt like they were being punished. 6th grade, they just found each other, and every day they did homework together. They came to our house together. They shared everything. They convinced us, they made a proposal to go to high school, to a regular high school. So then they went to high schools together. Then they started looking at colleges. They came here together. They eventually get into the same apartment together. And in the end, they died together.
Maddie Mae, she was the first granddaughter, grandkid of any of her grandparents. She was Karen and my only child that we ever had, and so she got, everything she ever did was such a big deal, and she was just such a happy, such a great kid, such a perfect little baby, and so just smart and funny and beautiful. She was just nice to everybody.
The circumstances that bring us here tonight, they're terrible. The hardest part, we cannot change the outcome. And as a family, as a Chapin family, it's important that we share Ethan's legacy and talk about the impact that he made in his young 20 years, or his short 20 years. So this is where we choose to focus our energy because we are now Ethan's voice.
And Brian, you know, I talked to students ahead of the vigil just to get a gauge on how they were feeling and why they were there. They said they showed up because this is really the only way they felt they knew how to show up for the families and the victims and to show their support and to bring some semblance of closure to the family and to the community. And they said it was amazing to not only see Vandals and Vandal alum and staff, but to see just people from all over the community of Moscow and the surrounding areas there as well. You know, so many of them, as you've been reporting, decided to come back, while others decided to stay home and finish out the semester online.
True.
Others were not able to do that because they had to stay here and work. Those are some of the kids that I talked to today, and they said over the past 2.5 weeks, this has rattled the community, and tonight, without a suspect in custody, they are still shaken.
Because people just don't want to be out after dark. It's been pretty rattling, I think, for everyone.
Yeah, it's like we're all terrified. Like, our group was somebody who went down to the bars a lot, and none of us want to go. We're terrified to leave, like, our houses. Like, none of us will go by ourselves. I know where I live is I always lock my door, and then I put a chair in front of my door just in case.
Yeah, Moscow has always been so safe, and I know personally that I lived somewhere that, you know, we didn't really always lock our door, but now it's like, lock your door, deadbolt, make sure the windows are locked. We've gotten a little bit scared, I think.
Yeah, it's terrifying. It's something that you wouldn't expect to happen here or anywhere.
We hear that over and over again as we've been reporting on this story, Brian, over the last 2.5 weeks, that nobody expected this to happen here. And we also know that not every student feels that way. You know, some are carrying on, they're going out to the corner club, they're going back out on the streets, and they're continuing on this semester. And
Dr. Blaine Eccles also said, the Dean of Students tonight, you know, be that light for each other at this time. Ethan Chapin's mom saying, this is the time to remember to be kind to each other. And so we're seeing a lot of that coming back into play here, being in the town of Moscow and on the campus of the University of Idaho. Other people who couldn't make it here tonight, I know there were other vigils around the state, both down in Boise and also around, even around the country, because they were encouraged. Vandals, obviously they spread out from here, but vandals around the country were encouraged to turn their porch lights on and show solidarity and show their support. And a lot of people did that around the country tonight. And schools from West Ada to Twin Falls to Coeur d'Alene turned on their stadium lights for a few hours today as well. Some even held in-person vigils. And one of the vigils that was held was at the University of Idaho Boise campus downtown on Front Street at the Water Center. And that is where we find our Abby Davis tonight. Good evening, Abby.
Good evening, Morgan and Brian. It was a heartbreaking, but it was also a heartwarming scene as about 200 community members, vandals, non-vandals, gathered behind me in front of the University of Idaho Boise location to remember the victims, honor their families, and really support the University of Idaho. Everyone I talked to just really wanted to remind people to keep your friends and families close and hug them tight.
It's just really hard to process.
One by one, lights shining bright.
Like, that actually fills my heart a little bit.
Big and small.
It's a scary time.
All in remembrance of 4 bright souls taken too soon. University of Idaho students Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonzalez.
We hope the vigil and show of solidarity across the state serves to heal as we confront this devastating loss in the Vandal family.
University of Idaho Boise honored the 4 students on Wednesday night, along with the Moscow campus.
I really wanted to go to the one in Moscow, but it just wasn't really, I decided to stay here. But it was actually super, super nice that so many people came out.
It makes me happy to know that people in Moscow, the students in Moscow, the faculty in Moscow, they're going to see this and they're going to know that they're not alone. It is everybody in the state that cares and loves them.
The fact that this happened in the little tiny town where I went to college, where I felt so safe and I had so many great memories, it just really hits close to home.
The entire state of Idaho showed its support for the Vandal family on Wednesday. Schools far and wide lit up the sky.
It's just our symbol of solidarity with the University of Idaho, with our partners in education.
West Ada School District included, who turned its athletic fields lights on from 3 to 6 p.m. A gesture Superintendent Derek Bubb says highlights what Idaho is all about.
One of the things that I think defines Idaho as a community, as a state, is this idea of unity, and that we're going to, during difficult times, we're going to band together and we're going to be here for each other, and we're partners.
U of I student Sophia Legault says she's grateful for all the love.
I think that the Vandal community definitely has done all that they can do. And I feel a lot more loved than before. I don't know, I just feel like there's just so many resources now.
When I said far and wide, I really meant it. School districts in Nampa, Boise, Horseshoe Bend, Cascia, Twin Falls, and many, many more, they all turned their lights on and stood in solidarity with the University of Idaho and the victims. So Morgan and Brian, it was really just an outpouring of love here throughout the entire state.
It certainly sounds like it, Abby. Thank you very much. And you know, this case, of course, and this murder has caught the attention of media outlets all over the world. Here tonight at the Vigil, regional media outlets, national media outlets, Court TV was here. Dateline had a crew. I saw a crew from Inside Edition here tonight. But kind of the side story of this is, what about those that are here all the time? Like, for example, the students, the student journalists that have to cover, well, they cover things on a daily basis, but now having to cover something they've never thought they'd have to cover. We're going to have that story coming back when we come back live from the University of Moscow, or University of Idaho, excuse me, in Moscow, when we come back.
Welcome back out to the University of Idaho at Moscow, where Brian Holmes and I have been for the last day. Earlier, a vigil was held to honor the 4 stabbing victims that were killed earlier this month in a house just off campus. Tonight, that vigil, extremely emotional, as you heard us talk about. On the platform, on the media platform earlier, we stood next to journalists from the University of Idaho Argonaut and the radio station here. And after the vigil, and even before, we saw them hugging their friends. I mean, this is very personal for them.
It is. It's very personal for them. I mean, this is one of the things we thought about with all of this national coverage and all this kind of stuff. Like, what would this be like for a student who's also wanted to be a journalist, have to now do this, turn around and kind of flip between being a student and a journalist when this affects them so close to home? So, you know, you're in the community, you're part of this, and now having to turn around and cover something that is, well, just a devastating tragedy. We wanted to find out what that was like, so we went out and spoke to the news director of the Argonaut.
The weather for the Moscow-Pullman area.
A blast of winter blew into Moscow a bit early overnight.
Winter storm warning continues until 7 p.m. Thursday.
It's supposed to be like this, I guess, into tomorrow, too. So we'll probably get quite a bit.
But it still pales in comparison to the storm that hit this college town a little more than 2 weeks ago. And the aftermath has been falling continuously since.
It feels safe, typically.
Abigail Spencer is a junior studying journalism at the University of Idaho.
If I was going to study journalism anywhere near where I grew up, it would probably be here.
She's not only KUOI's news producer, she's also the news editor of the school paper, the Argonaut.
We really do have one of the best public journalism programs in the Pacific Northwest, if not the nation.
In the last 2 weeks, they've written more than a dozen stories.
Lots.
On the quadruple murder in a home off King Road.
It's really just been increasing coverage as more stuff has come out.
Abigail says she got into journalism for the service aspect of it.
I want to give back to my community.
She's done that by covering everything from student government to city government, to events on campus and off. Like every other student, Abigail got the vandal alert on Sunday, November 13th.
The thing is, like, vandal alerts are normally about, like, the moose. It's normally like, hey, there's a moose on campus, don't go pet it. And then it's like, hey, Moscow police discovered that someone got murdered. Be careful.
Even she wasn't sure what to make of it at first.
I will say the first few hours, it didn't quite click for me until, I will say, we had a news meeting that night, and that's when it really clicked for me that happened.
Why? What happened at the meeting?
We got an initial report of what happened, which really shook us, as well as that was right around the same time we found out that it was 4 people. For something like this to have happened was kind of earth-shattering for us. And I think a lot of people were really scared, and that hasn't really faded. But yeah.
So how does a journalism student handle covering the murder of her fellow students? Abigail says it's a separation with which she is still coming to terms.
I will say I don't think I've quite clicked fully out of journalist mode, and I don't think, because I think my first instinct was almost in a self-preservation to click into journalist mode. So I think there wasn't really a time that I just was thinking about it as a student. Cutting yourself off from your feelings isn't good journalism either, because it makes you become like this callous robot. Instead, I think I feel those feelings, but I set them aside so I can do my job.
This is a tight-knit community. This thing kind of affects everybody, has affected everybody. Can you still look at this objectively?
We're trying to balance it because we know we're not objective. We're still students. We're also dealing with this in our community.
Has it changed your mind of this career?
No.
Or has it reinforced it?
Anything, it's reinforced it. Because before this, I was thinking is it really worth it? And then it kind of really just reminded me why we do what we do here. And it has reminded me why I do what I do. There's sometimes that it feels like drudgery and monotony, but things like this and being able to give a mouthpiece to those who are suffering and those who are hurting is really a great reminder of why I do what I do.
Abigail was really inspiring, actually, today, and she did have a chance to process this a little bit through the Thanksgiving break, but she said probably the hardest thing is going to vigils like this, like we saw her there tonight, because normally she could put on that journalist hat and be the journalist. This brings out the emotion out of all of it and the lack of objectivity in it. But also, there's a part of the whole campus, they cover everything, and this has been so consuming that they haven't been able to cover all the other things going on around campus.
Yeah, that's tough. And this has also been all-consuming, of course, for police who are consistently fighting misinformation and rumors and speculation. In the void of information comes speculation, and people try to fill that. But in every single interview that we have done up here over the last day, everyone has been extremely frustrated with the amount of rumors and misinformation that's been spreading. They say it just does a disservice to the victims and to their families and to the community. Doug?
Brian and Morgan, great job for the last couple of days there in Moscow. Safe travels on your way home. And as we said earlier, tonight, every Idahoan was a vandal. Thank you, too. And if you have any information on the Moscow homicides, please contact the Moscow tip line at the number on your screen, 208-883-7180, or the email tip line at ci.moscow.id.us. And of course, we'll continue to follow this story and keep you updated as we learn more. Follow us here on TV, also our website, ktvb.com, social media, and the KTVB app for the latest information.
From News Channel 7, time for 7 First Alert weather.
So there's going to be quite a few things happening here in the next 24 hours. First of all, we have some rain on the way. There could be a little snow mixed in. Fog is possible in the morning. A cold front about 10 to 11 o'clock, which means some gusty winds that could take place. So it could be changing to snow during the day. In fact, imagine this, temperatures around 40 degrees in the morning, but by 11, 12 o'clock drops to 32. That's what's unusual about tomorrow. Snow will be gone by about, we're looking at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So first of all, you're looking at some of the rain as well as the rain-snow mix that's coming in, and then the change to snow. And then you could see the snow pretty much gone by about 5:30, 6 o'clock tomorrow night. Now in the mountains, there's still that heavy snow in the mountains. Down here in the valley, it's a possibility of an inch, maybe, on something like that. Watch those roads Friday mornings. After the rain and snow and the temperatures dropping into Friday morning, you can see what's going to be taking place. Some very slick conditions. After we dry up, looks like the Bronco game looks good on Saturday, but some snow late Saturday night into Sunday. After that, we dry up next week. Very cold, 17 by next Wednesday morning as some of that Arctic air starts to push in. That's a weather forecast. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
The 15th annual 7 Cares Idaho Shares is now underway. Over the years, nearly $4 million and more than 1.7 million pounds of food have been donated. On your screen is a list of the 9 amazing charities your money greatly benefits, including the Idaho Food Bank, the Boise Rescue Mission, and several chapters of the Salvation Army. You can donate now through December 10th, and it's easy. Just scan the QR code on your screen or go to 7 Cares Idaho Shares on our website, ktvb.com, to find a link to donate. We're back in a minute.
The biggest message was just, it's here. It's time. Everything else, let it go. Everything else, you know, it doesn't matter.
I was born a champion and I just want the ring. You can join the team cause we headed to the ship. Hey, you can have the champ.
Everything that we put in and everything that's going on, you know, focus where we are right now and take advantage of this opportunity.
You looking at a champ, hey, all I do is win.
I just told him no regrets. Don't have any regrets. We love football. It's huge, and just make sure that you guys know you got to put in everything, because at the end of this game, you won't get it back.
You looking at a champ.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Don't forget to watch Wake Up Idaho tomorrow morning from 5 to 7. Good night.